Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Maybe doing an introduction, so hopefully everybody will trickle in before we get started. Tonight we're talking about the book The Song of Songs, or the Song of Solomon. It's unclear exactly why various English translators decided to start calling it the Song of Solomon. You'll find it in some English translations for some reason. I mean, we know where it comes from. It comes from the first verse. The first verse identifies this as Solomon's Song of Songs, right? But the title, the Hebrew title that I wrote here is Shir HaShirim, which Shir HaShirim, you could obviously tell they're repeating the same word, it means Song of Songs, right? And the Greek title is Asma Asmaton, Song of Songs, right? And in Latin, it's Centum Centacorum, Song of Songs. So it's very, in all the ancient versions, it's very clear the title of it is Song of Songs. But perhaps it's because they wanted to make it fit better with the other wisdom literature that we've been studying, Book of Proverbs, Book of Ecclesiastes, right, which are attributed to Solomon.
Did it appear first in the King James, Song of Solomon?
I believe so. It's only in English translation.
The first English translation.
Yeah. It's only in the English title. Yeah, that they do that. So yeah, I'm guessing maybe to group it in with the other wisdom literature, to make that connection to Solomon clear. Not entirely sure. But a reason why they might want to try to group it in more strongly is the book of Song of Songs is, on a number of levels, weird. And by that I mean, it's not like any other book of the Old Testament. It is a different genre of writing, right? This is lyric love poetry, right, which we don't find. We had lots of different types of poetry in Psalms, but none of it was love poems, right? From a man to a woman or a woman to a man, right? So it's a different genre. Nowhere in it does it mention God explicitly. And even if you go back to the Hebrew and the Greek, in the Hebrew, about 11% of the words that occur, which is a high amount for a book, 11% of the words that occur in this book only occur in this book of the entire Old Testament. So it has a different vocabulary than the rest of the Old Testament. So it's not just a different type of writing, but I mean it's a whole different milieu, going on in this book from the rest of the books.
And they're using a different thought process, or
That's what I'm getting at. A different set of vocabulary, different set of words, different structure of writing, different type of poetry. So it's totally unique among
we're not going to find anything
books
like
of the Bible. Right. This is it.
Okay.
And that includes Proverbs and Ecclesiastes that we just went through, and Wisdom of Solomon we're going to talk about next. They're not structured like this.
Does it have any comparisons in other literature of the same period outside of
Yes.
Scripture?
It looks very similar to Egyptian lyric love poetry from this same time period. A lot of the examples that are used, we're going to see at the beginning especially, there's a lot of springtime images, with the spring and a young man's thoughts turn to love, So,
The rebirth of it.
right. So there's a lot of spring imagery. That's very common in Egyptian poetry. There's this image of the male lover having to go through treacherous terrain, to try to get to his beloved, That kind of imagery occurs in both. So it is very similar to other love poetry outside the Bible. of this time, which kind of makes it a little weirder, right? Because we're going and we're reading through the Old Testament, and now all of a sudden we run into this love poem. Right? It's sort of like, well, what's this doing here? Right? How did this end up here in the middle of all these other books? And so I've said this before in relation to some of the other books we've read, but it's important that we don't come to the Bible with preconceived notions of what ought to be there and what shouldn't be there. Right? That we don't show up saying, well, I've decided that the way God works is everything in the Bible is going to be 100% literal historical narrative. Right? So that's what the Bible, everything in the Old Testament is that. Well, then you get to Psalms, right? Or Proverbs. You get to things that obviously aren't that. So then you have to do one of two things. You have to throw out your theory, or you have to try to, worst case scenario, you try to turn whatever book you're looking at into something it's not. Okay. And so there's a long tradition in coming to the Song of Songs of trying to turn it into something it's not. There are two errors you can make in approaching the Song of Solomon. Because the Song of Solomon is not just, I should go on to say, as I teased this class, the Song of Songs is not just a love poem, a lyric love poem between two people. It's a rather risque love poem between a man and a woman. It's an overtly sexual love poem between a man and a woman. Right? So it's not just my love is like a red, red rose. Right? There's going to be some relatively graphic imagery used, right? And so that even adds more. You read through the Bible, you find a love poem, and then you find out there's naughty bits in the love poem. Well, we need to explain this away. So we can. This is troublesome. So there are two ways you can go too far. One way, which is the older way you can go too far, is you try to take the Song of Songs and just completely spiritualize it. So you take it and you say, this has nothing to do with a man and a woman and human sexuality. This is just all about God's love for his people, or all about Christ and his church, and that's it. Right? That's it. Now, I'm not gonna accuse anybody who is involved in the production of the Orthodox Study Bible. But you might note, number one, how voluminous the notes are when you get to this book compared to the books we've been reading previously. How much of the page is taken up by footnotes. And if you go through and read it and read the footnotes, notice which verses they comment on and which verses they skip. Verses that clearly have a spiritual significance, you'll get a big, this is what this means. And then it'll skip over a few verses. And then there'll be another guy. So I don't think they were trying to make the error of totally spiritualizing it. I think they were just trying to focus on this on the spiritual element, trying to focus on the spiritual element. The other way you can go, which has become more popular in modern biblical studies, when you look at feminist Bible scholars and whatever else, is to cut out the spiritual element entirely, right? And say this is just a love poem, right? This is just about sex between a man and a woman, right? And how great that is. And just take it as, see, the Bible endorses sex, so sex is good, right? Which is what a lot of people want to do with it now, right? Now, those aren't errors in that there are elements of them that aren't true. They're errors in that you're going too far in one direction or the other, right? And to the exclusion of the other, okay? Because what we have here is a love poem, a sexual love poem between a man and a woman, right? But we also know, taking in the context of the scriptures, the prophets, we're going to read Ephesians 5, where St. Paul talks about marriage, that marriage and marital love is an image of Christ in the church. So both are here, right? Both are here. And we have to keep both if we want to stay balanced. Right? If we want to stay balanced.
Is this sort of a Nestorian problem where you try to split God from human nature? The spiritual and the physical,
Well,
the human and the divine, is it sort of the same issue?
It's sort of a Plato problem. Because that's where the allegorical interpretation really starts. Right? Is with Plato, who of course said, physical reality is kind of bad. Right? And the spiritual reality is higher and better. So all this stuff about sex, let's get rid of that. We need to focus on these, higher, more beautiful things.
Conceptually, is the mistake that they're sort of seeing the human and the divine as separate, and that's why they overemphasize one?
Well, that they're demeaning the creation. They're putting the spiritual, they're putting God at enmity with his creation. They're essentially, in that view, they're saying, well, God and the spiritual is good, and the physical, these created things, are bad. Right? Either bad by comparison or actually bad. Right? And so not important. Whereas the whole point would be about God's love of his creation. Right? So the whole point would be that God's creation isn't bad. Right? And so you have to have both in balance. Right? You have to have both in balance. Now one of the reasons why this book is important, if you think all the way back a few years ago to the last time we talked about sex in the Bible study, right? It was back in the book of Leviticus. Right? And the book of Leviticus talked about sex in a very different way than what we get here. Because the Levitical law, as we talked about then, was primarily given to restrain male sexuality. We talked about that at the time because it was men in that society that had all the power. Right? Women had none. And so, in terms of the society, men could do whatever they wanted to their wives. And in general, they could get away with doing most of what they wanted with other women who weren't their wives. And so God has to come in and set limits, right? And say, no, this is appropriate, this is inappropriate to men, to the ones who are making the decisions, to the ones who are in power. Right? And so he's going to come in and say, it is not appropriate for you to be with a woman and her sister. It is not appropriate for you to be with various close relatives. It is not appropriate for you to be with a man as you are with a woman. It is not appropriate for you to be with your wife during her period because you're trying to get out of giving her children and you don't want that responsibility. Right? She won't get pregnant if you are with her during that time. Right? So God comes in Leviticus and says, here's the boundaries. Right? Here's the boundaries for male sexuality. And goes on and says, you're not to rape slaves. You're not allowed to rape in warfare. You're not allowed to do any of these things that were commonplace at the time. This obviously is the flip side. Right? This is the more positive side. But because we live in the post-romantic age, we take a lot for granted in terms of love between men and women, and especially love between spouses. You remember when we were going through Genesis way, way back, right? We had all of this drama with Abraham and Sarah, right? And Abraham mistreating her, and God trying to teach him, no, you need to treat her differently. And then we came to his son Isaac, and when Isaac met Rebekah, it said, and Isaac loved Rebekah. It was just that little statement, right? And that's not something that's there, and that's not something that's there again with Jacob and his multiple wives, right? Remember all the trouble that comes there with the jealousy between the sons and everything. Right? It says Isaac loved Rebekah, right? And that's sort of the model. And St. Paul, we hear the epistle reading during the Orthodox wedding service. And the thing that sort of grinds our gears is the part of it where we tell the wife she's supposed to obey her husband. Right? We all go, right? And then it says, husbands, love your wives. Well, when St. Paul said it, it was the exact opposite. When St. Paul said it, wives, obey your husbands, was taken for granted. Because if you showed up in a Roman law court, and you were a wife who had disobeyed her husband, you were in trouble. Right? There were no legal rights for women at that time. So, that was taken for granted. But the idea that a husband should love his wife was revolutionary. It was revolutionary. We think about, we go out and we fall in love and we get married. That's not what happened for most of human history. For most of human history, your parents and your spouse's parents went and made a deal, usually involving the exchange of property, right? Goats or cows or money, just straight up money, right? And then you found out who you were getting married to. Sometimes you didn't see her until you were standing there in front of the priest, right? You didn't see him or her until then. You didn't have a choice. You didn't get to choose, right? And so when St. Paul tells somebody in a marriage like that, you need to love your wife. Not just like Leviticus, the only person you're allowed to have sex with is your wife. But you need to love your wife. Right? That was a revolutionary thing. Right? He didn't say you need to love her if she's lovable, you need to love her if you find her attractive, you need to love her. No, he said, whoever she is, right? You need to love her the way Christ loves the church, be willing to die for her, even though you didn't pick her. So that at the time that St. Paul said it was revolutionary. So this love poem here is written in the 900s BC. Okay, a love between a man and a woman. So this is not something that we take for granted, right? This is not like the silly bad poetry that didn't rhyme that I wrote to Tricia before we got right. That's sort of required, right? It's Valentine's Day, you need to send her. That didn't exist then, right? This is husband who have chosen to love each other, who have chosen to love each other. And so when we get to the idea of sexuality within here, we have to take it within that context. Right? Sexuality here in the Song of Songs is seen as a way of expressing love. It's seen as a way of expressing love. Okay? It's not seen as something other than love. It's not seen as some separate thing. Why is that important? Well, St. Augustine has messed us all up as modern people, right? Because there is a sinful passion called lust. Right? Lust is when you use another person to satisfy your own physical desires. Okay? That's lust. When I go and use someone else, right? And that's the opposite of love. Right? That's not a type of love. That's not connected to love. That's the opposite of love. Right? Love is not using another person. Love is yielding your own desires in order to satisfy the desires of someone else. Right? So lust is the opposite. But St. Augustine couldn't separate sexuality from lust in his mind. So for him, even when you're married, even when you're expressly trying to have children, he says, there's a little bit of lust in there still. There's just a little bit around the edges. Right? There's still a little lust in it. And so it's still a little bit bad, right? And if you're not trying to have a kid, well, then it's even worse, right? And it just sort of gets worse and worse from there. Okay. And
This
so,
boy live in a cave.
well, no, he's a man who had a concubine and who lived a very promiscuous lifestyle most of his life,
Oh,
and then became a Christian.
Yeah, Augustine was
Yeah.
pretty rancorous guy.
Yeah, and so he struggled with it personally. He struggled with it personally. And so that's why he couldn't separate, because it was for him a personal, everyday thing where he was struggling with lust. Right? And he ended up becoming a celibate monk after he became a Christian. Right? He never completely came to terms with it. Okay. But that's not the view we get from the scriptures. Right? St. Paul says that the marriage bed is holy and undefiled. And we read over that very quickly, right? But it's important that he said both. He could have just said the marriage bed is undefiled. Meaning what? Meaning it's okay to have sex with your spouse. Right? Like if you're married, it's okay. Right? Which is how it was presented to me as an evangelical Protestant kid in high school. I was talking to Jeff before class. We basically got told, well, if you have sex now, right, you're going to get 5 diseases that are going to kill you, and you're going to have a baby. And it will be terrible, but if you wait until you get married, it'll be the most wonderful thing that ever happened. That's basically what, what we got told. And so for us, right, marriage was basically lust with permission. Right? For us as a bunch of teenage boys, it's like, oh, okay, I want to do these things. So if I marry her first, then I can do all those things. I see how it works, right? Which is completely skewed. Right? Completely skewed. It's not just, he doesn't just say it's undefiled. He doesn't just say it's okay. Right? He says the marriage bed is holy. Holy. Right? The adjective that we ascribe to God, the adjective we ascribe to the saints, right, are holy. It is a positive, good thing for a married man and woman to express their love in that way. It's not just permissible, right? It's good. It's good. And so, when we come to Song of Songs, when we come to two people, man, expressing their love for each other, we should expect to see those physical manifestations. Right? We should expect to see that. Because, again, sexuality here is a means of expressing love. That's an appropriate way of expressing it between a married couple. And inappropriate outside that context. And we talked about back in Leviticus how it isn't the love that's wrong. It's the way of expressing it. Right? It's a way of expressing it. So you should love your brothers and sisters. You should not express that love sexually. Right? Parents and children should love each other. They should not express that love sexually. 2 men and 2 women can love each other. Can love each other and spend their lives together. But they shouldn't express that love sexually. That sexual expression of love becomes good within the context of a married man and woman. So we can't confuse those. Can't sort of confuse those two. Or confuse sexuality and lust, because they're not the same thing. Lust is never okay. Lust within a married relationship will destroy a married relationship. It is not okay to use your spouse to gratify your desires. Again, that's the opposite of love. So all that said, by way of introduction, we're going to get, unless anybody has any questions before we start, get into the text. This may be one where people are too shy to ask questions. Okay, so as I said, this is a lyric poem, and as you may have noticed, when we have chanting in the church, a lot of times it's structured antiphonally, meaning there's multiple voices that go back and forth, right? So at the beginning of liturgy, right now, we're doing the verses of the antiphons because we're in the Pascha period. So usually Issa Howard, right, does the verses. We'll say the verse, and then the choir sings back, and he says the verse and sings back. We do when we have Vespers on Saturday night, and in Matins when we have the Prokimenon, right? There'll be the Prokimenon, and then a verse, and then the Prokimenon, and we go back and forth. This is written essentially the same way. So there are sort of parts, okay? So, and there's a little bit of debate as to how many parts there are. But I would argue that there are, just to simplify, that there are basically 3 parts. And the 3 parts are the lover, the beloved, and the companion. Now I think these are identified, if you're reading the Orthodox Study Bible, they changed lover to groom and beloved to bride, because I think they wanted to make plain the marital context. Yeah, just to make that very plain. It's made plain in the poem either way, but to make that clear. But so this is the male part, the female part, and then the companions are companions of hers. They're sort of cheering them on, you know. You guys are awesome. You know? All right, love's great. You know, kind of thing. Okay, and so wherever, just as a side note, remember back when we first started Job, I said there are some people who think Job was originally a drama. Right? This is part of why. There are some people who theorize that maybe Job in some earlier form was some kind of poem like this. Because you have like Job's friends, and then Job going back and forth, and God. So, and the problem, as I said at the time with that theory, is we don't have any older forms of Job that look like that. So it's just purely conjecture. But so yeah, these are the basic voices, and as we're going to see, the lover is described as a shepherd and is compared to King Solomon, and so it's usually considered that he is King Solomon, and the title that's translated shepherd is actually ra'im, which means someone who oversees. It's translated in Greek as episkopos, actually, which is bishop, an overseer. So it's sort of the idea that the king is the overseer of Israel. Right, so both those titles would apply to Solomon. And then the beloved, the woman, is in the original referred to as a Shulamite. Nobody's sure exactly where Shulam was. So, but it's she. From what we read, she says she's not of noble birth. So Shulam may have been some village that basically ceased to exist. You know, it's some little farming village that ceased to exist at some point in history. Okay. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and get started. Song of Songs, chapter 1, verse 1. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. That's that first verse. Verse 2. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. For your love is better than wine, and the smell of your ointments is better than all spices. Your name is ointment poured forth. Therefore the young maidens love you, they draw you. Okay, so it starts with her sort of inviting him, right? Beginning by inviting him, pointing out that apparently all the young ladies right, enjoy his company. And her companions say in verse 4, "We will run after you for the smell of your ointments." And she says, "The king brought me into his chamber." Companions say, "Let us be extremely joyful and glad in you. We will love your breasts more than wine. Uprightness loves you." Right, it says, "I am black and beautiful, O daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Do not look at me because I am black, for the sun gave me a tan. The sons of my mother fought with me and made me keeper in the vineyards, but I have not kept my own vineyard. Tell me, you whom my soul loves, where you shepherd your flock, where you rest them at noonday, lest I become as one who encompasses herself with the herds of your companions." Right? She's saying, she's being sort of coy and shy because at that point, now everybody goes to tanning beds to try to get tans. At that point in history, if you had a tan, that means you worked outdoors, which meant you were poor. Right? You're out working in a field all day, so you got dark. Right? That meant
That's
you
what
didn't
she
have
means
any
by
money.
black.
Right. That's what she means by black. She's been out there. She's very dark. Well, you can look at some of the folks among us from the Middle East. When they get some sun, right? They get very dark. I do not. I turn bright red. But as you can, folks from the Middle East get very dark when they get the sun. So this means she's from the lower class, so she's being kind of shy. Right? She's saying, I work the fields, for my family. That's why my skin is so dark. And then she says, asks him to tell her where it is that he goes to graze his flocks. Right? When he goes out, so that she can go find him, right? while his flocks are grazing. So then in verse 8, we hear from him for the first time. "If you do not know yourself, fairest among women, go forth on the heels of the flocks, and tend your young goats by the shepherd's tents. I have likened you, my beloved, to my horses in the chariots of Pharaoh. Your cheeks are as beautiful as turtle doves. Your neck is a small necklace." Okay, so being compared to a horse nowadays isn't. But at the time, the horses in Pharaoh's retinue would be decorated. Right? They'd have all kinds of gold jewelry and everything. Right? They're the best looking horses. The horses that the king rides in behind. Right? So he's talking about her beauty. "We will make for you figures of gold with studs of silver. While the king was at the table, my spikenard gave forth its smell. My beloved is to me a bundle of myrrh. He shall take rest in between my breasts. To me, my beloved is a cluster of grapes from Cyprus in the vineyards of En-Gedi." Well, these are places. En-Gedi is near the Dead Sea. Right? These are sort of luxury items. Does anybody know where oil of spikenard appears later in the Bible?
It's
The woman that poured the...
Right, the woman who anoints Jesus' feet.
Yeah.
That's a reference back to this.
So
Right.
spikenard is not part of the 11%.
No. Spikenard is a very thick, fragrant oil. Right? But so when the woman comes and anoints Jesus' feet with it, that's a reference back to this. Right? The idea of her offering herself to the one she loves. Verse 15, "Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves. Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved, and indeed lovely. Our bed is shaded. The beams of our houses are cedars. Our ceilings are cypress wood. I am a flower of the plain, a lily of the valleys." Verse 2, he responds, "As a lily among thorns, so is my beloved among the daughters." She responds, "As the apple among the trees of the woods, so is my beloved among the sons. I desired to be in his shadow and to sit down, and his fruit was sweet in my mouth. Bring me into the house of wine, set love before me. Strengthen me with cakes of raisins, refresh me with apples, for I am wounded with love. His left hand shall be under my head, and his right hand shall embrace me." We're not going to go into detail there, but she's not just talking about, boy, I'd like to come over to your house and have dinner. I think it's kind of obvious where she's going here. Verse 7, I implore you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the hosts and powers of the field, that you rouse not nor wake my love until he wishes. The voice of my beloved, behold, he comes leaping on the mountains and skipping over the hills. My beloved is as a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of Bethel. Behold, he stands behind our wall, looking through the windows and peering through the lattices. My beloved answers and says to me, Rise up and come, my companion, my fair one, my dove. For behold, the winter is past and the rain is gone, it is departed. The flowers are seen in the land, the time of pruning has arrived. The voice of the dove is heard in our land. The fig tree has put forth its young figs, and the vines are in bloom and give forth their fragrance. Arise and come, my companion, my fair one, my dove, and come, my dove, to the shelter of the rock, and take hold of the wall. Show me your face and cause me to hear your voice, for your voice is sweet and your face is beautiful. Okay, so we can see that springtime imagery, right? It's the end of winter is over. New life is coming into bloom. Verse 15, Catch us the foxes, the little ones that spoil the vineyard, for our vines are in bloom. My beloved is mine and I am his, he who shepherds his flock among the lilies. Until the day dawns and the shadows depart, my beloved, turn back and be as likened to a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of the ravines. In the night on my bed I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him but did not find him. I called him but he did not hear me. I will rise now and go about the city and the marketplaces and the streets. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him but did not find him. The watchmen who do their rounds in the city found me, and I said to them, Have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I departed from them when I found him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let him go until I brought him into my mother's house, into the chamber of her who conceived me. I implore you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the hosts and powers of the field, that you rouse not nor wake my love until he wishes. So we have this image of her in the middle of the night. She can't sleep because she's thinking of him. All right? So in the middle of the night, she goes out into the streets looking for him. Right? You know, while the watchmen are making their patrols. Does that imagery remind you of anything? It's kind of good we're doing this right after Holy, right after Holy Week. Remember in bridegroom matins?
The watchman and the wine.
It talks about we will wait for you more than watchmen wait for the morning. And in bridegroom matins, this whole idea the bridegroom comes at midnight, right? And the wise and foolish virgins, right, who have no oil in their lamps or don't have the oil in their lamps. This is referring back to the same imagery, right? Of her soul waiting and longing for him. Verse 6, Who is this who comes up from the desert like pillars of smoke, offering incense, myrrh, and frankincense with all the fragrant powers of the perfumer? Behold the bed of Solomon, 60 mighty men round about it from the mighty ones of Israel, all holding a sword and trained in war. Every man has his sword upon his thigh because of fear in the night. King Solomon made a palanquin for himself from the trees of Lebanon. He made its pillars of silver and its back of gold, its covering crimson, its interior a mosaic of love because of the daughters of Jerusalem. Go forth and look at King Solomon, at the crown which his mother crowned him in the day of his wedding, and the day of the gladness of his heart. So, the image may sound a little weird here. You know, behold the bed of Solomon. He has this beautiful bed and it's surrounded by 60 soldiers. Who all have swords because of fear of the night. But the idea is that in his bed there is safety. Right? And when they're together, she is safe. She is protected. Right? She doesn't have to fear anything, even in the middle of the night. We talked about how, again, one of the things we take for granted with all of our security systems and security lights and a police force and everything is that we could go to sleep at night and expect to wake up in the morning without anything happening most of the time. Right? We have to think back to an era before all that. All right? Before they even had really good, efficient locks on doors. Right? That for especially someone like her who was poor and who was a peasant, you didn't know what might happen. What might happen in the night. It's a dicier proposition, but she knows when she's with him that she's safe. Right? That's the idea here. And then just a sort of footnote on in verse 11. Remember, this is referring back to, as we saw in first, second, third, and fourth kingdoms, that in Judah at least, the queen was the king's mother. Right? Not his wife, or one of his wives, as the case may be. But the queen was the king's mother. It was her who put the crown on his head. And so, this is part of our reference point. If Christ is the king who sits on David's throne, well then who's the queen? His mother. Right. Okay, so chapter 4, the lover or the groom responds, "Behold, you are beautiful, my companion. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are like doves behind your veil. Your hair is as flocks of goats coming down from Gilead." Verse 2, this is going to sound like a weird compliment, but "Your teeth are as flocks of shorn sheep that went up from the washing, all of them bearing twins, and none of them is barren." It's actually none of them is alone. Meaning, you have all your teeth. But this is the 900s BC. Okay, so having all your teeth and having them all be white like that, you're doing pretty good, right? So, verse 3, "Your lips are like a thread of scarlet, and your manner of speech is pleasant. As the rind of a pomegranate are your cheeks behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David, the one built on courses of stone. 1,000 shields hang upon it, all the arrows of the mighty men. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle that feed among the lilies. Until the day dawns and the shadows depart, I will go my way to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. You are altogether beautiful, and there is no blemish in you. Come from Lebanon, my bride, come from Lebanon. Beginning with faithfulness, you shall come and pass through from the top of Senir and Hermon, from the dens of lions and the mountains of leopards. My sister, my bride, you ravished my heart. You have ravished my heart with one look from your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. My sister, my bride, how beautiful are your breasts, how much more beautiful are your breasts than wine, and the fragrance of your garments than all the spices. Your lips, my bride, drip as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the fragrance of your garments is as the scent of Lebanon. My sister, my bride, is an enclosed garden, a sealed fountain. Your plants are a garden of pomegranates, with the fragrance of a fruit harvest and aromatic plants, spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon. With every tree of Lebanon, myrrh, aloes, with all the finest spices, a fountain of gardens, a well of living and rushing water from Lebanon. Remember, verse 12 says that his bride is an enclosed garden, a sealed fountain. Remember, that opposite imagery to that was used in Proverbs when it was the man talking to his son. And he's talking to his son about his sexuality, and he said, "Do not go out with the harlots." And he said, "Do not let your springs of water flow in the streets," right? But keep them enclosed, right? Keep them protected. That's what he's saying. He said he's referring to her virginity, right? That she's kept herself pure, right? And that she now has this to offer just to him. Verse 16, "Awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind. Blow through my garden, and let my spices flow out. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat of its fruits." Well, that, I think we know what that's referring to. Chapter 5, "I came into my garden, O my sister, my bride. I harvested my myrrh with my spices. I ate my bread with my honey and drank my wine with my milk. O friends, eat and drink, and O brothers, drink abundantly. I sleep, but my heart keeps watch. The voice of my beloved, he knocks at the door. Open to me, my sister, my companion, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is wet with dew, and my locks of hair with the drops of the night. I have put off my tunic, how can I put it back on? I have washed my feet, how can I dirty them?" Right, so the image is, he's standing outside her door in the middle of the night. Right? He's gotten wet from the dew and everything. And he's taken off some of his clothes and kicked off his shoes, and he's ready to come in. Right? And he's saying, "Should I just go back home? Should I just go?" Right? As he knocks on her door. But where do we see that imagery referred back to? In the in the New Testament. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone lets me, I'll come in and not with them and them with me. Verse 4, my beloved put his hand by the opening of the door, and my heart was stirred by him. I arose to open to my beloved. My hand dripped with myrrh, my fingers with choice myrrh upon the handles of the door. I opened it for my beloved, but my beloved had passed by. My soul went after him because of his word, and I sought him but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer me. The watchmen who encircled the city found me. They struck and wounded me. The guards of the walls removed my veil. I implore you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the hosts and powers of the field, if you find my beloved, what should you tell him? That I am wounded with love. All right, so we get this imagery of her going out in the middle of the night again, looking for him. Right, looking for him, trying to find him.
Well, if he was there knocking on her door, what happened to him? Did he disappear?
He slipped away.
He disappeared.
Yeah. So we're gonna
She wasn't quick enough to answer. Why is, in these verses, is he refer to her as sister? My
Yeah, that's-
sister, my wife. Yeah, she referred to her as sister.
That's weird for us. But what it's trying to convey, and this was common then. This is in this type of literature to refer to brother and sister. The idea being that their souls are connected very intimately. Right? If you think about families, you think about families at this time. Right? You have your parents, but your parents probably weren't around for much of your life. Right, at this point in history. Right? And your children, by the time your children were coming of age, you were probably gone at this point in history. But your siblings, your brothers and sisters, those were the people who the closest family members who you'd have with you your entire life. So he's comparing her to a sister in that respect. So it's not just that, again, separating lust from love, it's not just that, wow, she's really pretty, and wow, I really want to spend time with her in bed. It's also that he has this intimate connection of companionship and spiritual and emotional closeness with her. Right? It's sort of the equivalent of when we say today, like, Trisha's not just my wife, she's my best friend. Right? What I'm trying to convey when I would say that. Right? That in addition to being, there's this deep level of closeness. Right? So that's what he's trying to communicate with that sister idea. Right, so verse 9, what is your beloved more than another beloved, my beautiful one among women? What is your beloved more than another beloved, that you implore us? Right? So she says to the companion, go find him, tell him, right, that I am wounded with love, ask him to come back to me. And they say, what's so special about him? Right? Basically back to her. Verse 10, my beloved is a shining and fiery light, chosen from countless thousands. His head is like refined gold, his locks of hair are shiny and black, like a raven's feathers. His eyes are like those of doves sitting by pools of water, having eyes bathed in milk and fitly set. His cheeks are like bowls of spices pouring forth perfumes. His lips are lilies dripping choice myrrh. His hands are like elaborate gold set with precious stones. His stomach is like an ivory tablet inlaid with sapphire stones. So apparently he had a six-pack. His legs are like pillars of marble, established on golden feet. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedar trees. His mouth is most sweet and altogether desirable. This is my beloved, my companion, O daughters of Jerusalem. Chapter 6. Where has your beloved gone, you beautiful one among women? Where has your beloved turned his attention? For we will seek him with you. My beloved has gone down to his garden, to the beds of spice, to shepherd his sheep in the gardens and to gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He who shepherds his sheep among the lilies. You are beautiful, my companion. You are my good pleasure. You are as beautiful as Jerusalem. You are as awesome as an army set in array. Turn away your eyes from before me, for they have ravished me. Your hair is like flocks of goats coming down from Gilead. Your teeth are as flocks of sheep that are sheared, which came up from the washing. All of them bear twins, and none of them is barren or alone. Your lips are like scarlet thread, and your manner of speech is lovely. Your cheeks outside your veil are like the rind of a pomegranate. There are 60 queens and 80 concubines, and maidens without number. My dove, my perfect one, is the only one, and she is the only one of her mother, the choice of the one who bore her. The daughters saw her and considered her blessed. The queens and the concubines will also praise her. Who is she who looks forth as the early morning, beautiful as the moon, choice as the sun, awesome as armies set in array? So apparently this is relatively early in Solomon's life because he was just getting going. He only has 60 wives and 80 concubines at this point.
How many queens does it say?
Well, that sounds
Mothers.
sort of disingenuous to us, right? Yeah, there's these 140 other women, but you, you're the one. You're the only one, right?
Well, the question in my mind is how many mothers does it say?
No, it's a different word. So verse 11, I went down to the orchard of nut trees to see the fruits of the valley, to see if the vineyard had blossomed, and if the pomegranates had put forth blossoms. There I will give my breast to you. My soul did not know it. It made me as the chariots of Aminadab. Chapter 7, Return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, and we will look at you. What will you see in the Shulamite, she who comes as the troops of armies? Why are your feet beautiful in your sandals, O daughter of Nadab? The curves of your thighs are like small necklaces, the work of a skilled craftsman. Your navel is like an elaborate bowl, not lacking mixed wine. Your stomach is like a heap of wheat set about with lilies. Your two breasts are like two fawns, the twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like a tower of ivory, and your eyes are like pools in Heshbon. By the gates of a daughter of many, your nose is like the tower of Lebanon pointing toward Damascus. Your head crowns you like caramel, and the locks of your hair are like a purple garment. The king is held captive by your curls. How beautiful and how sweet you are, O love, with your delights. Now these next couple of verses are very poorly translated in the Orthodox Study Bible. What it actually says is chapter 7, verse 8. Verse 8 and the beginning of verse 9. What it actually says is, your body is like a palm tree, and your breasts are like the fruits of the tree. I said, I will climb the tree and lay hold of its fruit. Is what it actually... They kind of got a little nervous about that, I think. Indeed, your breasts shall be like clusters of the vine, and the fragrance of your nose like apples. And your mouth like a good wine that goes down smoothly for my beloved, fit for my lips and teeth. Verse 11, I am my beloved's, and his desire is towards me. Come, my beloved, let us go forth into the field, let us lodge in the villages. Let us rise early in the morning in the vineyards. Let us see if the vine has flowered, if the blossoms have appeared, if the pomegranates have blossomed. There I will give you my breasts. The mandrakes have put forth an aroma, and fruits of all kinds, new and old, are at our doors. O my beloved, I have kept them for you. Who would have granted you, my brother, to nurse at my mother's breast? I would have found you outside, I would have kissed you, and no one would despise me. Then I would take you along and lead you to my mother's house, into the chamber of her who conceived me. I would give you spiced wine to drink, the juice of my pomegranates. His left hand would be under my head, and his right hand would embrace me. I implore you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the hosts and powers of the field, do not rouse nor wake my love until he wishes. Who is she who comes up, is made white, and leads on her beloved? Right, so there's that imagery. Now she's been made white. Right? What does that mean? Well, it means now she's been with him. Right? Her complexion's changed. She's not having to go out and work in the garden. Now she's treasured. She's treasured by him. Right? So she's with him in his home.
So is she a concubine yet?
No, they're married.
Oh, they got married.
Yeah, they're married.
When did they get married? So how do you know that they're married?
The
You didn't tell them.
Well, yeah, there was actually transition of the veil. You notice he said under your veil. The first time he said under the veil your cheeks are as pomegranates. And then he says and outside the veil.
Oh, okay.
What it referred to. Let me go. Yeah, it's another place that they didn't translate that well. Give me a second. Yeah, and I can take you to the verse. I should have pointed that out. It's
So the swings and all of them, breaks her, would that be when
Right.
they're not married?
Yeah, there's a particular verse that refers to his banners being over her.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and that's a reference to the way marriages were conducted
That's
at the time. Where's you
first.
read?
About the banners.
Yeah, where's that in verse of which chapter?
Chapter 6. Or 9, that's key.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a reference to her being seated at his banqueting table and his banner being over her, which is the reference to the wedding. And now that I'm looking for it, I can't find it.
So when he left, was he like courting her?
Yes. Yes, that was the he was sort of playing hard to get. Just a second. Look at the verse. I couldn't wait that long, Mr. Bill.
I really want to hear the good parts.
You missed them.
I'm sorry, class.
So give me just a second to find that verse.
Army said in the red in chapter 6, verse 4.
Yeah, no, that's not it. It's it is all the way back in chapter 2. Is a reference to their wedding. Yeah, and it's translated, like I remembered it was translated in the Orthodox Study Bible, it's translated, bring me into the house of wine, set love before me. That's why I grazed over it. But 2 verse 4, if you look at it, if you have the King James there,
You brought me to the banquet.
to his banquet table and his banner over me is love, or something to that effect. Yeah, that's the reference to the wedding feast. So yeah, it's 2 verse 4, but it kind of gets buried in the Orthodox Study Bible by the translation. So yes, all that is to say, yes, they're married.
Pretty early on. They got
Well,
married
it's
pretty early.
remember this isn't sort of a
It's not a chronological linear.
it's a poem.
I never liked it.
Well,
I never did. No, I never.
well, don't worry. After this, we're pretty much done. So, but yeah, so they are. All that is to say, they are married. Okay. Okay, so yeah, verse 5. So now she's come into his care, right? Under an apple tree I raised you up. There your mother travailed in labor for you. There she who travailed in labor for you gave you birth. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. For love is as strong as death. Jealousy is cruel as Hades. Her sparks are sparks of fire, even the flames thereof. Much water will not be able to quench love, nor will rivers drown it. If a man should give all his possessions for love, men would utterly despise them. So that's good. Here we get something that sounds a little more like the wisdom literature we've been reading, right? Talking about love, but many waters will not quench love. It's not just using an image of love as a fire, but you have to remember, as we talked about several times, water in the Old Testament in this period is a symbol of chaos and destruction. Right? We tend to think of water more positively, but water, they're thinking of the sea. Right, the Mediterranean Sea. They're thinking of the storms that come in off the sea. They're thinking of the flood in the Old Testament, right? So, especially when you're talking about many waters, right? You're talking about like a tsunami, right? That even this powerful, chaotic force cannot defeat love. Right? That's why it takes so many prayers for us to bless holy water. We go on and on about the water because that's the original significance of water. And then if a man should give all his possessions for love, right, men would despise them, meaning nobody would take the deal. Right? Nobody would take the deal. I'll give you anything I own in exchange for the person you love. And they'd say, no dice, right? I don't care how much you have. I love this person. Verse 8, our sister is small and has no breasts. What will we do for our sister in the day that when she is spoken for? If she is a wall, let us build silver battlements upon her. If she is a door, let us carve cedar panels for her. She responds, I am a wall and my breasts are as towers. I was in his eyes as one who found peace. Solomon had a vineyard in Baal Haman. He entrusted his vineyard to keepers. A man was to bring 1,000 silver coins for its fruit. My vineyard before me is mine. O Solomon, you shall have 1,000, and those who keep its fruit 200. So what's that image? She says, well, there's this business deal, right, the king made, where he leased out a vineyard. Does that sound like the setup to a parable? Anybody remembers? And he said, when he let out his vineyard to these people, he expected this much return, right? He expected this much profit back from them, right? And she's saying, well, my vineyard, right, what I have to offer him, right, what he's invested in me, I'm going to give him back even more beyond that. Verse 13, you who dwell in the gardens, the companions give heed to your voice. Cause me to hear. Verse 14, escape my beloved and be like the gazelle or the fawn of a deer on the mountains of spices. So that's the love poem we find in the middle of the Old Testament. Right? I think we saw several places where it's referred back to. And it's especially referred back to, we're going to see as we get into the prophets coming up, the most common sort of picture that God is going to use once we get into the prophets of his relationship with Israel and with Judah at all is that of a husband and a wife. And it's going to be mostly a negative image as we're coming up in the prophets, because he's going to say, in fact, for example, to tease a little bit, one of the first prophets we're going to read is going to be Hosea. He goes to Hosea and he says, I want you to go and marry this prostitute. Right? And Hosea's kind of like, what? Just go and marry this prostitute. And make sure that everyone knows that you're going and marrying this prostitute. Because this is an image of my marriage with your people. Because you've been unfaithful to me. And then he says, I want you to have children with that prostitute. All right? And the first one that's born, I want you to name him Lo-Ami, which means not my people. So, when I say negative, and when we get into Ezekiel and Jeremiah, there's going to be some graphic sexual stuff too, where he's talking about it, right? Where he's saying, look, I was your husband, I was faithful to you, right? I provided for you, I protected you, I've done all this for you. What did you give me in return? You ran off with the Egyptians, you ran off with the Baals, you ran off with right? Anybody who came by, who had a little bit of money, had a little bit of glory, had a big army, you ran off, right? That's going to be the biggest negative image. When we get into the New Testament, that image is going to be flipped. We flipped into a positive image. I already mentioned Ephesians 5, where St. Paul talks about how marriage between human beings is an image of Christ and His church. Right? And we saw a lot of imagery borrowed here from the Song of Solomon in bridegroom ads and the other services of Holy Week. Right? To close, I want to explain an image that we just had, since we're doing this right after Pascha. You may have noticed that a number of the hymns right around Pascha, they had all this bridegroom imagery in Holy Week leading up to it. Pascha, there's a number of references to Christ emerging from the tomb as from a bridal chamber. Okay. Now, this is going to be a little graphic, but not any more graphic than anything else we've talked about tonight. What is that referring to? Okay. That's referring to, at the time someone was married, in the Old Testament period and up to Christ's time, right, you'd have the wedding feast, and during the wedding feast, which would often go on for quite some time, during the wedding feast, the man and the woman who just got married would go off into a chamber that had been set aside to consummate the marriage. And when they went off to consummate the marriage, once they were finished, the groom would emerge and he would hold up a cloth that had on it the blood stain that proved that his bride had been a virgin up until that point. Like I said, a little graphic. But would hold up that blood stain. Right? That's what those hymns are referring to. Okay. But in Christ's case, when Christ emerges from the tomb as from a bridal chamber, after the consummation of His wedding to the church, we didn't keep ourselves pure or virginal. Quite the opposite. Right? As we talked about the prophets, the images God's going to use. And so it's His blood that He comes out and displays. One of those hymns even says He came forth displaying the virtue of the church. What does that mean? Not how wonderful the church was, right? But His blood that He shed to, as the beloved says in the Song of Songs, to make the church now white, now clean, right, now pure. So that imagery carries through all the way into Easter. And it's really, so the reason the Song of Solomon is in the Old Testament, and it's so important in the Old Testament, is because the mystery, as St. Paul calls it, of a man and a woman in marriage is at the very heart of what the gospel of Jesus Christ is all about. Right? To the very core of it. And so only by sort of celebrating that love between a man and a woman can we really get to that understanding of Christ's love for us and for His church. So unless anybody has any questions. Yeah.
It's not a question,
Sure.
but to just think in contrast, she's talking about, it says your cheeks are, your head is like fine gold and your eyes are the eyes of doves. That's like the dirge hymns that we sing on Friday. The next one.
Yeah, there are references, yeah. I didn't mention that, but that is true. There are references in the dirge hymns describing Christ that are taken directly from these descriptions here.
Not that I'm being impolite or not, Ancient Faith
Oh, I
Radio
know.
is coming at 8 o'clock with that.
You've gotten your sex, now you need your Pentecostalism.
I gotta go speak in tongues now. I'm ready for speaking in tongues. The baptism of the Holy Spirit. Hallelujah.
Okay, well, we will adjourn in general unless anybody has any other questions. Next week,
Where do we take up, may I ask?
next week we're going to start the Wisdom of Solomon, which is another one that may not be in your Bible. If it's not, I will have spares.
This is.
What item, Solomon?
I will have spares. We have the Wisdom of Solomon and then the Wisdom of Ben Sirach, both of which I'll give you loaner Bibles. And then after that, we're going to start on the prophets.
Oh my God.
And the prophets will be our last big section, then we're done with the Old Testament.
I take it that next week we go back to being anti-sex because it's the wisdom of
No,
Solomon.
we still stay the same.
You'll have to listen on the stuff that I'm doing.
No,
They
he records everything.
Yeah, do they put that on?
Well, they're
I mean,
going,
they-
like I said, they're going to one extreme, because it is about it.
Well, yeah.
But it's also about,
These are
It wasn't that much.
so there's, well, you have to have both pieces. Right? It's not just a love book, like any other love song.
The friends I know, they take it, it's totally about Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, like
You just sex and thinking it is. Yeah, that's too going too far, like, and you're missing the connection. Because St. Paul really
Sorry, you
says,
missed.
when we get into a we'll talk about it more, but it really says it's a real quick mystery. Marriage, that it's, it's a mystery. It's just one of the things, and that's very fortunate in the way it reveals Christ.
Hey, Bill.
Say hi.
Let me get
Is
my
that just?
Good to see you. Holy Week and everything. That was great.
I mean, it depends. I mean, in some cases,